Hey, Hawkeye fans, been a while. Chad Leistikow, Dargan Southard, both of the Des Moines Register. Uh, got back from vacation on Monday, Dargan, and, kind of wanted to ease into the week.
Nope.
Yeah. I had a couple ideas. I wanted to write about Caleb Brown from Ohio State, and which I did. And, kind of just sort of start poking around to stories I could do. And man, all of a sudden, everything kind of blows up. I mean, I kind of knew over the weekend something was brewing. We talked about it on a radio show this week with the sports gambling. So I kind of knew that something was probably going to be coming in terms of information. And so that has definitely dominated the headlines. And the purpose of today's show, I guess, is to kind of recap the busy week, find out, talk about everything we've learned to this point. And obviously, you're going to be out at Duane Banks Field this evening for a huge series, which involves the Iowa baseball team, and certainly this gambling scandal will have visual evidence of where things stand. I guess if and when if one of those four players is back, and I don't expect them to be, but maybe there will be one back, or maybe more will be back, or maybe it's just more absences that kind of puts a cloud, I guess, over this whole thing.
Yeah, obviously, I've been kind of trying to view this whole thing through Rick Heller's perspective, and obviously Iowa's bubble struggles have been documented over the last few years. It seems like they're in a better position this year. But then all of a sudden, this massive story hits, and Iowa's best hitter isn't in the lineup. So I'm sure it's been a turbulent week for him, and it was finals week as well, and he had knee surgery on Monday. So it's been a very eventful week for Rick Heller. But again, I kind of agree with you. I would be surprised if any of the suspended guys are back this weekend. Obviously, Keaton Anthony is kind of the headliner there. Everybody wanting to know if he's going to be back, and for good reason. Obviously, he's one of the better hitters in the conference and probably Iowa's most potent offensive weapon. But it'll be interesting to see kind of how this story goes and in what direction. The story that you wrote yesterday, I think, was very interesting on kind of uncovering some more stipulations on how the NCAA views betting and its punishments. One thing that I kind of found interesting was how hard it was to find. You kind of had to dig a little bit for it. And, I was scanning the betting resources that the NCAA has that I would assume is part of the compliance meetings that, I would assume just about every team has. And it wasn't in there. So, I don't know if maybe that's something that becomes a little more front and center because, as we'll get into, the stipulations are pretty clear from that regard, and they're pretty harsh, especially if I think the one thing that stood out the most is the punishment for people who bet on their own school, not even necessarily in their own sport. So, I'll let you dive into what you found, but it would be interesting to know if any of the athletes involved have seen any of that material, because if they did, then to me, that would be a stronger indication that, hey, you can't do this at all, really. So I'll kick it back over to you and let you dive into what you found in the documents on the reinstatement process.
Yeah, that was it was eye-opening for me too, and I'm glad that it kind of moved the story forward. These are not documents that are public, but ones that I was able to get a hold of and view. And it's basically the Division I reinstatement committee's kind of policies on gambling, which they updated following the 2018. Well, in conjunction with, it was actually a couple weeks before, but in conjunction with, I'm sorry, they didn't update it then, but any bets placed since basically April 2018 fall under this umbrella. So obviously that's what we're talking about with, and I'm sure you guys know the headlines by now. 26 Hawkeye student athletes have been flagged, I guess you could say, not identified publicly. 15 at Iowa State involving all men sports for Iowa. Of course, baseball, football, basketball, wrestling, and track and field. Track and field also affected this weekend for the Big Ten championships. We don't know. They're not saying how many athletes, and that's a lot harder to figure out. Unless it's a super prominent person and for a fact that they're not injured. But from what I was told, track and field not severely impacted this weekend at the Big Ten championships as Iowa's men look to defend that title. For those that are concerned about Iowa winning a Big Ten championship in track, does not seem like this will impact that very much, by the way. But anyway, back to the stipulations. So just to kind of break it down, the story is at DesMoinesRegister.com, posted yesterday. There are 3 levels of severity, okay, in regards to reinstatement. Gambling on sports of any kind, of any NCAA sanctioned sport. I know some of this is reviewed by now by the end of the week, but any sport that the NCAA sanctions a championship in. So that goes from even I think lacrosse. Not that I don't even know if they have lacrosse betting, but yeah, that would be something you can't bet on. But like the big ones: football, basketball, hockey, tennis, golf, baseball, at a pro level. I mean, NHL game, MLS game, anything like that. That is absolutely no, and you lose your eligibility point blank if you are caught, identified betting on any of those sports. And it's a hard line rule, but there is a process for reinstatement. And so, as you mentioned, Dargan, yeah, if you bet on your own team, that was kind of eye-opening, and maybe people didn't realize that. Maybe it was assumed, but if you bet on, if you match fix, shave points, whatnot, obviously we all would have, I think understand
that's kind of the headliner no that is.
Yeah, and I think everybody knows, everybody's known that for 50 years.
Right.
It's just as the sportsbook stuff, obviously become way more prevalent in the last 5 years, essentially to date. May 14th, I believe, was a Supreme Court ruling in 2018, so we're right about there. But anyway, the other stipulation in the reinstatement is, if you it's a student athlete who engages in activities designed to influence the outcome, or who participates in any sports wagering activity involving the student athlete's institution, shall permanently lose all remaining regular season and postseason eligibility in all sports. So that is essentially a lifetime ban if that is what happened. And there has been, we don't know for sure, but there has been a lot of buzz even from the start that, these guys just bet on the Iowa women's Final Four game against South Carolina, which you and I were both at in Dallas, and Hawks were 11.5-point underdogs and won outright. And you understand that because, there's, if an Iowa, athlete says to another athlete, yeah, we know based on the scouting report, we got a great chance tonight, or we know, something about South Carolina, or we know Caitlin Clark's not going to play. Obviously she did, but I'm just saying, if you know those things, the world travels fast would travel fast in that case. Now, in this case, I think it was probably just oh gosh, we can win this game. We're, 11.5 points is a lot, and innocent bet maybe, but that would be a lifetime ban. Interesting. Did you kind of know that before, or kind of a feel for that?
I didn't, but to be honest, it makes sense because, especially how often these athletes mingle with each other,
right.
It's not like the basketball players just hang out with basketball players. Basketball players can hang out with football players, who hang out with baseball players, who hang out with wrestling guys. So, yeah, I mean, it sounds pretty severe when you spell it out like that, these guys could have placed something as simple as $15 on Iowa money line to beat South Carolina, and that could cost them, the rest of their eligibility. The thing that I wonder is how many of these athletes knew of that stipulation, because to me, if I'm an athlete and I hear that, as absurd maybe in some settings as it may sound, that to me is I'm not going anywhere near that. And it's very clear what happens if you do. And so it's been interesting because I've kind of tried to form, I've kind of let the story form my own opinion on this. And, as somebody who gambles a decent amount, like, I initially thought, wow, that's kind of, mainly looking at the Virginia Tech situation. Oh, a guy who just placed some money on the NBA who had no insider knowledge, didn't win a ton, and got 6 games. That kind of sounds silly, I guess, or outdated in a lot of ways. But if you kind of look at what this whole industry thrives on, it's, in terms of it becoming such a public activity, is, knowing or assuming that anything can happen when the game starts. And if that's not the case, if that's impacted in some way, then it kind of devalues the whole industry and the whole intersection of sports and gambling, and, not having it make such a huge impact. And so, I guess I can see why the NCAA has this pretty much zero tolerance policy, because, it would be great if, say, when you sign up for a sports book, if you're an athlete, I was reading something after the Alabama situation broke, and I guess some of the sports, the U.S. Integrity site, which is what flagged that, is working on this product to where coaches, I guess, put in a list of everybody who, is on the roster, student staffers and all that. And it goes in this database, encrypted database. And, if you try to register for an account and you're in that database, then it's going to flag you. And so, it would be great if, like, you could sign up and, get like an athlete account, and it only gives you the options of what you're able to bet on. Maybe that technology comes out down the road. But to me, it honestly makes sense from my perspective that the NCAA has this zero tolerance policy. Now, one thing I guess you could criticize is how known were these stipulations, especially what you found yesterday, because, it doesn't seem like it's among the top material that is given to athletes as part of the compliance. But again, if it's spelled out that clearly what happens, and pretty much every outcome is very severe and losing a lot of time, to me, it doesn't, it makes sense to just stay away from it if you're an athlete, because what you can do that's not going to get you in trouble is so small compared to what you can do that can get you in trouble. So, it'll be interesting. I would imagine programs all across the country in so many different sports are maybe amplifying their betting compliance or their betting presentation that they give to athletes, because, I think the hope from Iowa and Iowa State is they're going to get some leniency, but I don't know if anyone has a lot of confidence that that's how it's going to go.
Definitely. And, there's no doubt that in my mind, and I don't think anybody's mind, that this probably, you would find 26 athletes in almost any college program anywhere.
Especially in the legal states where it's
in the legal states. That's kind of what I'm talking about. And Iowa doesn't even have prop bets. We got into that on a radio show the other night, but it is kind of crazy when, like covering a Big Ten tournament game, and, in Indiana, and it's like Iowa versus Rutgers or whatever. And like, you can bet on,
a lot of things.
Jordan Bohannon assists and Jordan Bohannon 3-pointers, Chris Murray 3-pointers, anything.
I mean, they even had prop bets for the women's games once it got later in the tournament. So obviously a player prop would be a lot easier to influence by a particular player rather than, relying on that player to influence the team-wide outcome. So, if just an example, if Jordan Bohannon had under 14.5 Jordan Bohannon points, that's pretty easy to influence if there's some, sketchy behavior going on. So these are the kind of things that the NCAA has to consider and the sports books have to consider, when they make these guidelines. And I think that's a large reason why it's essentially a zero tolerance policy.
All right, let's get into those other things that we found in these documents. Placing online sports bets, also a no-no. And then, that gets back to the Virginia Tech case. We keep citing it, but it's certainly worth emphasizing. He was reinstated through the process. Got it knocked down to 6 games, which falls in line with this table that essentially was part of this reinstatement document that athletes, these are not rules, but they're guidelines. Okay. So, and everything is analyzed on a case by case basis. So, if you bet on sports, at all, this is not your own institution. It is the starting penalty or guideline is what they call charge a season, sit a season. So you get the rest of your season and then all of the next season. So that's kind of, that's a little bit of what we've heard on maybe some of these baseball things. So, out the rest of this season and then out all of next season is kind of the starting point. However, if I'll just break it down kind of in my article. You can read it at wineregister.com, hawkcenter.com. It covers Iowa and Iowa State. But if you are somebody who, and if it's an NCAA pool or a fantasy football league, you're going to get a lot more leniency than placing an online sports bet. Okay. But overall, if you wager or risk $25 or less, okay. So that could be, hey, I entered a $10, NCAA March Madness pool. I didn't win any money. I bet on Iowa to win it all or whatever. That according to these guidelines, no penalty of eligibility is kind of the guideline, okay, for reinstatement. Now, it doesn't mean that that's instant. You have to go through the process that they have to make sure, but that's what it is. $25 to $100, you lose 10% of eligibility for that season. $100 to $300, 30% of a season. Between $300 and $500, 50% of a season. There you go. There's that Virginia Tech case that we talked about. He bet $400 on the NBA Finals. He won $40 and $41 in profits. And you do have to pay these things back, by the way, to also gain your eligibility. You can't you can't have won placed a $400,
even money
plus
bet.
5,000 bet on something and have won $20,000 or whatever, and just
they're
keep
not
it.
gonna let you keep that.
So you do have to pay that back, but that does align, right? So, and then more than 500 goes back into that sit a season, charge a season penalty as being recommended. So, I have sports betting apps. You do too. Honestly, I mostly bet on NASCAR, and I know some of you are waiting for my NASCAR picks for Darlington. I'm happy to give those later.
Ironically, that's actually one of the few things that you should bet on if you're an NCAA athlete is NASCAR.
Well, there you go. If you are of age, if you're 21, 22 years old, and you really want to bet on sports and you're a Hawkeye athlete or a cycling athlete, just bet on NASCAR and horse racing.
UFC, maybe?
Maybe, yeah. I think that's okay. But I know there's no NCAA sanctioned NASCAR, so you're in the clear on that. Anyway, I'm making light of it a little bit here, but I just want people to understand the rules and stipulations. So anyway, my point was being, Dargan, was it's pretty darn easy to get up to $500 wagered, like even through $5 and $10 bets, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't take long, because you're essentially 50-50 chances on these things minus the juice, and So what a point being, even with reinstatement, we're talking about significant penalties, for baseball and namely football for Iowa and Iowa State.
Yeah, obviously the football concerns are probably front and center for both fan bases, just given that the precedents don't look super favorable for guys dodging any sort of lengthy suspension. Now, if it's 3 third-string defensive tackles, then Iowa is probably going to be okay. If it's a bigger name, then it could be a problem in terms of how this is handled. And it's been interesting. So I like to think that I wasn't a college kid that long ago, even though I got a Facebook notification or Facebook memory that it's been 8 years since I graduated college. So that was a little unsettling. But anyway, I've been trying to go through digesting this world as a college kid. And, if you're an NCAA athlete and you're sitting around with your buddies and none of the other ones are NCAA athletes and they're all putting 10, 15 bucks on the game and you want to join in, like, you could see how, maybe you're just like kind of get caught up in the moment of the situation and say, hey, I'm not going to get caught, or I'm putting a small amount and it's not going to matter. And I don't think the perception of any of these people that are among the athletes being investigated are, that they're criminals or any sort of that. But it is easy to kind of see how maybe some of those rules would fade from the front of the mind, in the moment as you're getting caught up. And so, again, it's a lot of people have said, outlining scenarios of, well, what if a Iowa basketball player bets on the World Series? How much insider information could they really have? And the answer is probably none, or very, very, very little, if any. But the fact of the matter is, kind of the conclusion I've come to is, if you're a Division I student athlete, you get a lot of opportunities and a lot of benefits and a lot of situations that most people don't get to encounter, especially now in the NIL world where, everything's kind of above ground and all that. Not being able to bet on sports for 4 years or 5 years, because most of these athletes obviously don't go pro. Some of them do, but not a lot of them. If you have to go 5 years or 4 years without betting on sports, that doesn't seem that outrageous of an ask, especially if it maintains so many other integrity things that are even above, what you might think of as significant. So, I do realize that, when you turn on a college football game, you're probably going to see 15 betting ads in the course of 4 quarters. So certainly it requires a lot more discipline from these student athletes than it did before, where, the only real way that you could get involved is if you kind of went down a sketchier path of, organized crime and bookies and all that of the past. So, I certainly understand that, it's a more tempting endeavor these days, but I think maintaining the integrity of sports and college sports in general is far and away the top priority of all these things intersecting. And so if that means that, an athlete has to sit there and watch the game the old way without any money on it while his friends do, that kind of seems like a reasonable stipulation to ensure that, much more serious stuff isn't also happening as well.
Yeah. And to be clear, there's still a lot of stuff we don't know in this whole deal, including the names. But, there could be, you just don't know. There could be, could there be I don't even know if they could ascertain this, but like a person of age betting for a person underage or something, or, somebody from, a Hawkeye team or a cyclone team, like having someone else place their bets back home for them or something like that. Like they know they were, in, let's say, Lawrence, Kansas, or I don't know if Kansas has betting or not, but
I think it does. Yeah.
okay. You always know who has betting. We know Texas doesn't because
Texas does
that.
not. No.
Yeah. So let's use that example. Like if a Big 12 athlete's in Texas, calls back home and says, put a bet on my account, on Texas Tech because we suck today or something. I'm just saying, like, who knows? Like, we just don't know what kind of levels each case goes to, and that's kind of the point I'm making. There's 41 separate cases between the, allegedly for Iowa and Iowa State, and everyone's going to be a little bit different. You have to say, and honestly, I believe that if I were a reinstatement committee and an athlete, you went through their phone, we believe that they've gone through their phones. I think that makes sense in a criminal investigation. They probably did to see what they bet exactly and when and on what. And you can see the history on these things. You and I know this. Did somebody just, let's say it was me, and I put $20 on the Chicago Bears. I used this on the KXNO yesterday. I put $20 on my favorite team, the Chicago Bears, to win the Super Bowl last year. Like a super long shot. Wasn't going to happen. No inside knowledge. I'm just a big fan, and I just want to root for it or whatever. Hey, maybe I'll win, $4,000 or whatever it was, or probably more than that actually.
You didn't win.
Didn't win. Yeah, 3 and 4. Got the number 1 pick. No, but I could see quite a bit of leniency given in something like that versus even like, even if you bet on, let's say, and again, I used this example yesterday. Let's say you are, a current Hawkeye tight end who is really good friends with George Kittle, for example. And again, I'm not implicating anybody, or this is a random example, but like, and you bet on a 49ers game based on some information maybe you got from him just in a text or something like that. Not like that he was even sharing like, oh, I'm not playing today or something, you know what I mean? Or something like that, like that's the kind of stuff that they just want. You just, as a fan, you want to watch these games knowing the integrity of the game is sound. And so I get that. And so I think something like that could be weighed a little bit differently in terms of leniency. And, and that's why the rules are there. If you bet $300 on NFL or $320 on NFL games, over 4 months last fall, you're going to miss probably going to miss half the football season if you're an Iowa State football player based on the guidelines that we saw. So significant, and we just don't know what's going to happen. But I guess I'll just leave it there. We're kind of talking in circles a little bit here. Anything else from you on the on these charts?
Yeah, I guess I would say that the case by case thing is definitely important because, if and again, this is just speculating and maybe making an educated guess. I would say that the bulk of those 41 athletes are probably pretty innocent situations in terms of how much they bet, what they were betting on, and all that. And again, that's kind of the benefit of moving this industry, into the light is you don't have to guess what they were betting on. You don't have to guess how much. All that stuff is very easy to prove and very easy to uncover in an investigation. So it's not like you have to hunt down bookies or anything like that and dig up records. All of it is very accessible by the people running these investigations. So in terms of if there are people who truly only bet $5 on a game, then those people should be, taken care of from a suspension or non-suspension standpoint, pretty straightforward. But again, I understand that these rules seem harsh, but you kind of have to take it from the top level down because, that's really the only way that, in my opinion, that you're going to get, this in the place that you want to, which is athletes not betting on games for the most part. And so, if there are some kind of eye-opening suspensions from players who are pretty noteworthy, obviously Keaton Anthony's kind of already been one of those. If it's a prominent Iowa or Iowa State football player that gets a lengthy suspension, then that's going to add more, headliner elements to this story. Maybe I'm sure there are athletes all across the country that are like, wow, this probably isn't worth it anymore, just throwing $10 here and there or whatnot. So again, I understand that there's probably a lot of this situation that isn't very sinister, that isn't very nefarious in thought process or action, but it's the NCAA is still finding its way to how to approach the above ground intersection of gambling and college athletes. And so I think approaching it with, hey, we're making this very clear that you can't do this. And it's going to be very, it's likely going to be a very big punishment if you do. I think if you send that message very clearly, then, after that, really anything that happens is kind of on the athletes and what they choose to do. And, maybe this will be a big case and a big outcome that kind of sets the stage for how these industries move forward.
Yeah, definitely. The nation is watching. And that's why I do think another reason that I think these penalties will be harsh, because they want to send a message. And I've shared this on our show the other night, but it's worth resharing. A current Hawkeye athlete in one of the affected sports, said that players from other teams have at least told him that they've bet on their own teams to win or cover, or I don't know, win or cover or whatever. But maybe they aren't. But there's a lot of Big Ten schools in gambling states, and that would not be any surprise to me. And that person would be, and under these rules, suspended for life from eligibility anyway. NCAA may not be a criminal thing if he's of age, but and eligibility wise, that's the case. So let's move on just a little bit here, Dargan. I talked to Kirk Ferentz and Fran McCaffrey at the West Des Moines Marriott the other night. Ferentz, I was asked not to ask gambling questions, and I didn't. I stuck by. I said I won't. It was like a fan event. I got invited there. It was great. I got one-on-one time with both of them for about 10 or so minutes each. And Fran said unquestionably before we even started, I'm not talking about any of this stuff. Kirk was willing to go there a little bit. I asked him, are you this is what I asked. Are you concerned that you're going to be without some guys? Given the news of the week, are you concerned you will be without some guys this fall? And that's where he said, yeah, he said, I don't know about concern, but we're watching it. And then he went into kind of one of his Kirk answers, which I appreciated, talking about, I read the other day that $2.5 billion were wagered in sports in the state of Iowa, in our state of like 3-some million people. He's right. And he goes, gambling, it's everywhere. I think that was his little dig at the fact that like it's become so intertwined with college sports, and maybe the perspective should be a little bit different, or punishments should be a little bit different in terms of eligibility. And I'm just reading the tea leaves, what he said there, but he's right. I mean, the Swarm Collective, signed a big deal with Riverside Casino. I think it was, I have to go look at the press release. I thought it was $500,000 a year or something like that into the Swarm. So, or maybe it was $500,000 total. But anyway, I mean, that's like, Riverside Casino and Resort.
15-minute drive from Iowa City. So,
yeah. And I've seen a lot, on my time there. I like to play a little bit of table games, if given the chance.
Right.
I've seen many a current Hawkeye football players down there before. Not current now, but like back in the day.
Current at the time.
Current at the time. And it's perfectly legal. They're legal of age. They can do that. By the way, that is a legal thing you can do, is go play blackjack for 3 hours at Riverside. And as long as you're of age, totally fine. So again, the sports gambling thing, I agree with you. Going back to that, just don't do it. Easier said than done, I realize, but it's like Iowa football. Didn't allow you to tweet for 4 or 5 years. Like, this seems like way easier than that, just to not download a betting app. But anyway, that's kind of where he stood on things. And men's basketball is cited. I have heard there's really not much to that one, but football is definitely the one we're watching. The other little piece of info I got was no notable. There will be that was the phrase that was given to me. Football players involved for Iowa. I don't know about Iowa State. I've kind of seen some buzz that there might be more notable players at Iowa State. I don't know that. I don't cover Iowa State.
Yeah.
Just seeing what I've seen. But no, I don't know if notable means, hey, it's not Cade McNamara or Cooper DeJean, anything below that, fair game. But, could be, who knows? I would expect there's probably somebody in the 2 deep that won't be with the team for much of next year, but we just don't know. But anyway, that's kind of where Fran and Kirk were on this. I talked to him about a bunch of other stuff too, but anyway, your thoughts.
Yeah, and maybe, that might not be why Kirk is super concerned. If it is players who maybe are lower on the depth chart, or guys who, hey, if we don't have this guy, we'll be okay. That might be part of the reason why there doesn't seem to be a huge level of concern. But again, I've kind of heard the same rumblings on the Iowa State side, and it'll be very apparent. I feel like, all eyes that first week will be on, and the practices leading up to opening day will be very closely watched to see who is and who isn't there. And so, any absence on either side, I feel like, is going to automatically be assumed that that's what it is, especially if there's no injury elements to why that person isn't out there. So that kind of adds another storyline to the whole thing. And, again, it'll be interesting to see. I would imagine that betting compliance is a part of Iowa and Kirk Ferentz's, presentation to the athletes. It'll be interesting to see if any of that material changes, or if the message is kind of hammered home harder. Hey, we're not just saying you can't do this to cover, to check a box that we offered you compliance. Like, you really can't do this. And now there's tangible evidence as to what happens if you get caught. And so, I'm sure a lot of these guys probably didn't think that, the gaming commission or the DCI even cared what, they were doing, as long as they weren't betting, outrageous amounts or anything like that. But again, I really think that the resolution of this whole thing will reverberate through all of college athletics, not just Iowa and Iowa State. And so it'll be interesting if this amplifies coaches' approach to relaying betting compliance to their players, because it almost seems inevitable that that's going to be the case, that coaches are even more so going to take this more seriously based on what happens with this situation.
Yeah, Kirk said in that quote too, just like, this is something I really hadn't even thought about at all till Sunday. In 25 years, sports gambling within his program. And again, it's probably happened everywhere for years, even through bookies and whatnot. But it's just today's day and age, you can do it. It's a lot easier to prove, and because you have to register with the gaming companies, and there's oversight there. But you kind of have to hope, if you're Iowa, the state of Iowa, really, like, that other states are going to do some investigations as well, or have some underway. But that's just not the case. It just so happened that Iowa, which is one of the longer established states with sports gambling, so it makes sense that there's more, whatever, I don't know what you want to call it, but like more.
They're further into the process.
Like it's more established. That's the word.
Right.
I want to say. All right, Gar. We like to try to keep these at a half hour. We've gone over, and this has been a really fun conversation. I do want to point people to a really fun story. I don't know if it's fun, but interesting story you put about Iowa sports gambling ties over the years. It's really goes back to Connie Hawkins, deals with Ronnie Harmon as well, and one really interesting thing I didn't even know about. So check that out at Hawk Central and DesMoinesRadisher.com. But I wanted to throw it to you for one last thing here, because the Iowa baseball team really does have a big series here, and let's assume they're without these 4 players tonight and all weekend, and let's say they're out without them for this whole season. Is this still a team? Like, what is the situation? Like, are they like viable NCAA team without Keaton Anthony if he's not a part of this? Can they even make it there? Give us kind of the overview of kind of how you feel. I think they're 34-12 still, right? So
yeah,
really good record.
Their metrics seem to be in a little bit better spot right now than they have been in the past years where they've come up short. I think the biggest thing right now is their RPI is high 30s, low 40s. And so, really the next 2 weekends in the Big Ten tournament are more about keeping that RPI right there. Whereas in past years, they would get to this point and need to improve their RPI, which isn't the easiest thing to do inside the Big Ten. So, I feel like if they can take this Michigan State series, Michigan State's, a decent team in the Big Ten. I think they're around 80 in the RPI. So taking a series there would certainly not send your RPI the wrong way. And then they have a midweek against UIC, which that's got to be a win. And then they end at Northwestern, which if you followed Iowa baseball, there's been a couple of late season Northwestern series against bad Northwestern teams that have kind of derailed the whole thing. So, and this Northwestern team may be the worst of all of them. I think they're like,
oh wow, really?
They're like 9-36 this year. Yeah. It's very bad. Their RPI is like in the 260s. Wow. So,
yikes. Well, that's the game. Those are the matchups you don't want.
Right, exactly.
And you lose them, that kills you.
As unfair as it is, if Iowa loses that series, then it's going to totally change their at-large hopes. So, I initially said a few weeks ago that they probably needed to sweep that series. They may be okay just winning the series, but they've certainly got to do that. And then maybe, going into Omaha, don't go 2-0 and they should be, in good shape. So I would say overall in a little better of a spot coming down the stretch than they were. As far as Keaton Anthony being out, there was 2 games last weekend where Iowa put up 15 runs and 16 runs without Keaton Anthony. So, that offers a little bit of hope that it won't be that big of a deal. I do think that this lineup is a little more evenly spread. The production is a little more evenly spread throughout. So, I don't think it's a backbreaker by any means, but it's certainly going to require some guys stepping up. We saw Will Mulfler, who really didn't play a whole lot this year. He was starting at DH on Friday and Saturday in place of Keaton Anthony. He might be in the lineup again this weekend. So again, there's going to be some guys who need to step up, with Keaton Anthony out and some of the other guys as well. I feel like the biggest thing is this week has been a huge distraction week. You have this whole story. It was finals week as well. And Iowa can't really let any of that make a difference on the field this weekend because this is pretty much a must-win series as well. So some good things in terms of where they're at. Obviously, some negative things working against them in the distraction department. But I feel like this team has the leadership and has the key guys in place to finish this thing out. And making a regional would just be so big because, you look up and it's been 6 years since they won the Big Ten tournament and went to Houston. And pretty much every full season since then has been spending time on the bubble and missing the tournament. So just getting to the tournament would be a very big accomplishment just because of how hard it is to do. So certainly not the most ideal circumstances, but, I think Iowa can still get it done even without the players that they don't have.
Awesome. Awesome stuff there, Dargan Southard, on a lot of topics. So appreciate you and appreciate all you fans for tuning in. This was a long one, but hopefully it gets you kind of your fill of Hawkeye news, get you updated for the week. And we'll stay tuned. I'm going to be looking at, I got your tweet alerts ready for me, Dargan, tonight to see who's on the field and who's not tonight against Michigan State, 6:00, right?
Might be the most anticipated Iowa baseball lineup drop of all time.
Yeah. When do they usually send it out? Like a couple?
Usually like maybe an hour and a half before first pitch. So first pitch 6:05 tonight. So
can you imagine if he is in the lineup? Holy moly!
I mean, I
don't think there's any chance.
It's a big. put it, it would be a bigger story if he is in the lineup than
Yeah.
if he isn't in the lineup. So
Yeah. All
take
right.
that for what you want.
Okay. Yeah. You framed it really well, Dargan. Anyway, thanks a lot, fans. We're going to sign off now. Chad Leistikow, Dargan, Southard, Hawk Central.